Can everybody hear me? Okay. So we used to build forts. I'm Rock Done Roll on Twitter. My name is Travis Schmeisser. Like you said, I work for 80/20. We're a digital product design company based in Soho. I work on application design, interaction design, interface, kind of web, mobile, tablet, all the way up through even TV. We kind of start with conceptual models for applications, work all the way through planning and schematics, all the way through visual design, kind of end-to-end for products. And what I want to talk about today is something I've kind of noticed in our community recently and been thinking about a lot. And what I've noticed is that we're one of the world's most technically inclined, connected, and creative industries, but we've kind of lost our way from some of the things that we kind of got into this in the first place. We've lost some of our sort of self-expression and things we enjoyed that kind of initially got us started. When I was writing this talk, this popped into my Twitter feed. It was, let's see, early October, and this kind of has like a big gist of what I was kind of thinking and the way I was headed in this. And he said, remember, this is Noah Stokes at Mother Futon. He said, remember Red vs. Blue and Strong Bad? The internet used to be so creative. And I hadn't thought about those things in years, and I was kind of looking for examples and to illustrate this, and these are perfect. These were fun for the sake of fun. They weren't really work. They ended up actually turning a profit, both of these, luckily, but that's not really what they kind of got in there for. And it's so true, and I miss it. I know that some, depending on where you come from, what part of the world, we call them forts in the States. You guys call them dens, just to get that clear. I'm going to refer to them as forts. But we used to build them in our living room, up in trees in our backyards. We used to draw monsters that we had never seen and speak in languages that have never even existed. Our imagination sort of used to run wild and inform our worldview in different angles. We've lost that in the sense that we can't think about these things anymore unless they're a web app we're designing or the screen for an application. And I'm just as guilty of this. I think I've lost some of this as well, and it's something I'm realizing I need to bring back into my work and kind of regain. What I started to think about when I got back to like, where has this gone and how did I personally get here, started thinking about how I got into design in the first place. And if you've kind of ever thought back to what drew you in, I think like at first, I didn't even really know what it was. I knew it was visualizing things, I knew there was some kind of message, but I didn't really connect the two and understand some of the communication and really get what it was probably until a few years through school even, like fully realize it. And then if you're anything like me, I think during those periods there were kind of two major phases that kicked off this sort of discovery and where you ended up going. Whether you started on the code or design side, I think it's applicable on both ends. First of all, you kind of enjoyed for the sake of creating, and this is when you were really young. This is just something we kind of all did when we were smaller. You kind of did it for the love of the game, which is a typical sports term, but when you're young, that's all you did. It was about playing and kind of testing new grounds. Getting lost. It was okay to be scared and confused, and you kind of find your way through. All you knew at this point was you wanted to make things. You just needed to create, you were given some tools, and you just wanted to make stuff. As long as we had crayons and these things to draw on, we could kind of figure things out, like work through them, and then get out these ideas that we had in our heads kind of to share with the rest of the world. The only reason we did this was we had this kind of innate desire. We just wanted to express our voice and our ideas and kind of push them out. It was just simply that desire for sharing that kind of drove us to do these. And we would just pump out work, lots of work, just make stuff. Didn't matter what it was for. We'd write notes to our mom and dad. We'd make cards on holidays. We'd draw stupid pictures and build things. And just because we had to, all we knew was we wanted to make these. This piece is called Ninja Town. I found this on Google. And this is a city apparently solely composed of ninjas. And even the construction workers are ninjas in this. The guy operating the crane is a ninja. I wish I could remember this kid's name. So during the second phase, kind of after creating for the sake of making, you really felt something. So later on, I think most people kind of hit this when you first get the design bug, or you realize that this is something you're kind of interested in. You truly kind of feel what it is you want to make. You still don't necessarily really understand what it is. You don't know what design is. You can't really put your finger on what it is that's driving this desire, but something hits you in a way, and you know, caught your eye, and you're like, I like this. I want to do these things, and I'm kind of interested. How does this work? How can I capture this feeling, and then launch it back out in the world? One of my personal first memories, aside from just drawing at the coloring table with my mother, she was a kindergarten teacher, so I did a lot of that, cutting up stuff when she was making things for her kids. But past that, kind of getting a little older in my teenage years, Wizard Magazine had something called My Kind of Hero. Does anyone remember this? Wizard Magazine is a price guide. They write articles. It's all covering comic books. So the best section, and one of the only reasons I bought this, was this one called My Kind of Hero. And what they did was they would feature one or two in every issue, and people would send in their superhero. So they would draw, generally just one, maybe two little drawings. And then aside just from the illustration and the interesting artwork that came out of that, they would create this origin story and this whole world around a character. So within this one drawing they sent in and one thing that was published, all of a sudden you had this new universe. You had the power, you had to make up the costume, where they came from, what villains they fight, and what they do. And this just got me. I drew endless amounts of these things, stacks. I wish I still had them. I never got published, but it was fun making them, and that was the first place I always turned to. And that was one of the first ones where I was like, I want to tell stories and make things and visualize things, because there's more than just this one drawing to this guy. There's this story, this planet he came from, and why he got these powers, and what was the circumstance of that, and what does he do with them? So there's a lot of places to kind of go with that. I think the bug that kind of birthed my career after that, more moving into college and professionally, wanting to do this, was when I had that feeling a second time when I started kind of seeing ads and illustrations and graphics. And for me, the most impactful thing was pretty typical. It was record covers. So I saw those. I didn't really get what it was about the certain shapes and the colors and the pictures that were used, but somehow they worked together, and there were certain ones that kind of hit me right. And I was like, this visually sounds like the music, which is kind of a weird term, but that's all I could really understand at first. I knew that for some reason, this album became, the music of the album became the artwork, and the artwork became the music as well, back and forth. I couldn't really put my finger on it, but I knew that that relationship between the two was something that I wanted to kind of hit and be able to put back out into the world and figure out, like, how do I grasp this visual language to kind of share this? During that time, there were particular designer styles and sounds in the music that kind of hit me. And even though I think my understanding of why these things resonate with me, now that I'm further along in my career, I understand that a lot more, but there's this feeling that I still want to seek, and I'm still looking for every day in every project and everything I do. There's something that I need to capture in this hunger to get that feeling back that all these albums kind of hit me with. So how do we get that feeling back or recreate it? How can we regress back to when we were a little more excited and hungry and we had all of these interesting things to do? How can I make something that make other people feel the way I feel when I see this thing, whatever my thing may be? And this kind of works across all disciplines, this is print design, anything. How can I capture these things and make you guys feel the same way I feel? So then I kind of started thinking, what happened to us? Like, how did we get to this point when we were so hungry and had so much fun, and we would stay in the computer lab all night, and we were just apeshit about design? What turn did we take? Probably a big one is jobs, but how did we get there? So why is it that most of the things we make is only client work? And I think, once again, it's bills, it's all these things, real life sets in. You have less time to kind of make these frivolous things. But I noticed like Dribble, for example. There's a lot of great creative things happening on there. There's a lot of super interesting memes. Has everyone seen the one where it was about illustrating where you're from? So that was really fun. It was a total just one-off. It was made at the 400 by 300, that, or at least that ratio that Dribble supports. And you were supposed to illustrate in one frame where you're from in any way. It could be your city. Some people did the country. Some people did the state. But it was a great design exercise, and it was totally meaningless, but not a waste of time. It was really fun. And it was a way to kind of explore and just play around for once. And I'm sure everybody kind of got a lot out of it from that day for taking that like 20, 30-minute break and just kind of jamming on something that was not client work. So is it that we deem these as the most important things? This is why we're only putting client work up? Is that the most important thing we have going on that's worth discussion or sharing? Because I think there's a lot more that we could do, and I think there is a large amount of these things going on. I'm not like hating on Dribble, but most of it's client work, and I'd like to see a little bit more. So with identity, everybody, I think whether they intend to or not, whether it's on purpose, these are non-designers, this is everyone, whether on purpose or not, have this desire to kind of create and share. And I think it kind of goes back to your identity a little bit. It's a little bit about like who I am. I want everyone to know who I am. I want to talk about it. And the internet's perfect for this, and this has made it a lot easier to do these things. And it's become this great vehicle for people to display their identity. And I have a few examples that kind of show the progression of, I think, where this started and then kind of where it's morphing into. Even GeoCities and MySpace and those terrible designs, which everyone's going to cringe, are a really good example of this wild creativity and people, non-technical people, non-designers, just making shit because it was fun and playing around, and then having this space that they're like, this is me online, here I am. And all these places, or the first two that I'm going to talk about, necessarily weren't everyone in this room here. These were examples of, the everyday man, non-designer, which I think it makes it even more interesting. So the first one is a GeoCities page, and I tried to find the least ugly one I could. This one's actually not too bad. It's organized fairly well. There's 900 typefaces, but these were an example of people coming along, companies, organizations, and people, and saying, I have a home page now, which is like, at the time, like a pretty crazy concept. Like, you could give a link to someone, and they could go and see your stuff, whatever your stuff was. And some people would link to friends and have pictures of themselves or their family. But this was sort of the genesis for, our more complicated websites like we have now, like, your personal page that you have where you have your work and your about section. This was the extremely ghetto, he's missing an image down there, an extremely ghetto version of that kind of starting point. But at the end of the day, it was their place. I think from there, with our community, we started having blogs. We were technically inclined enough to install CMSs or hand code pages. And I think another evolution of that was, whereas home pages are, I am this is me now, this is my family, these are my friends through links most of the time. With blogs, everyone started to say, well, I have things I want to say and talk about now. So now I'm on here too, this is my place. But now I also have all these things I want to say and I want to talk about and show you. So it kind of extended on. But at the end of the day, very, very similar thing, just a lot more complex. There's a lot more meat there, I think. Still, this is my place. This is my URL, and this is everything that's me. Once again, I tried to pick a fairly nice, but still illustrate the point. So MySpace literally is in the same my place, but MySpace. And people started picking colors and changing fonts and putting new background images in. And although it was, a total mess a lot of times, it's really interesting. And I always found it funny that so many people would spend so much time customizing these things. They would search through the theme galleries and find the blocks of code and dump it in the about section. Do you remember how that worked? You had to open and edit your profile and then dump this mess of code into this box that was supposed to be about you, which is like the most ridiculously ghetto thing. And then on top of that, people would start modifying it and trying to figure out what those things meant, which we all know is CSS and we know hexadecimal colors. But these people didn't, but they were reading up on it and actually spending time mucking around in code, which is kind of ridiculous. And really interesting that they cared enough to spend the time to learn that. But at the end, this is her, and this is her place. And then they even started integrating. I don't think it was super widely used, but there was a blog section, and then it started introducing friends. And that's kind of, been passed on. Now everyone's on Facebook. This is the new timeline design, which has this feature of curating your past life. So you can even go back. It's not just in real time. I don't know how many people have messed with it yet, but you can actually go back and backdate your life. So they have things called life events, getting married, getting engaged, having a baby, and you can actually go through and say, this happened then. And then, in the future, as we move forward, it's going to be pre-populated with everything we do day to day, the people we become friends with, the pictures we put up. And then they've introduced this cover image concept, which is a way to customize a la MySpace without making it horrifically ugly. Now, if you remember in the old design, there was a profile image, and then these little pods, these look like the old ones. But if you remember, because there were blocks of pictures at the top, but if you remember, those were your last 5 pictures you uploaded or were tagged in, right? These are now the way you get to the different sections, although they visually kind of look the same. So in the old one, you had a profile image and blocks of your latest pictures. One of the things I thought was super rad that I started seeing was that even within these constraints, and even though Facebook is not made to do this, people started making all this wacky shit and putting their faces together and completing whole images and using these blocks in sequence in different ways, even to show progression. I even saw one that was like a little comic strip, like there was a little guy doing something in each frame. So I think it's really interesting, and I was like, that's really neat that these kind of, I don't mean average people in a bad way, these non-designers, the layman that is not technical, was like finding a means to express and make this thing for, why? Like these would mostly go away, especially this one. If you look, he made a post to upload those new photos, right? So he has the ones at the top that he had to customize, so those form the eye. And then he made a post and took a screen cap, right? Now the next time one of his friends uploads something, it's gonna totally screw this all up. But he actually went out of his way and did this in order that had rhyme and reason to it to create this kind of composition. Even though it's limited, they found a means to an end to kind of make this thing. So coming back to identity, all of these things kind of have that in common, and all the things we do within them have that in common as well. They're all about me, who I am, who my friends are, and what I want to say to the world. So we had home pages, and then blogs, and now we've moved on to kind of profiles, although we still have both of the other ones. Some of the other similarities are home pages and blogs would sometimes have a link section. If everyone remembers that, it was just a giant list of websites that your friends had. So that was your way of saying, these are my friends. Blogs had them down the side. It was referred to as a blog roll a lot of times. You still see them sometimes. It's not as big anymore, but it's literally just links down, and these are all of my friends. So it's interesting, those are now just actual friends in Facebook and MySpace, but they have similar purposes in the end. This is really light, but this is a quote from Zafrank on the video show he used to have called The Show, and it's actually from 2006, it's pretty old. But he says, in MySpace, millions of people have opted out of pre-made templates that work in exchange for ugly. Ugly when compared to pre-existing notions of taste is a bummer, but ugly as a representation of mass experimentation and learning is pretty damn cool. And it's true, it even goes back to that custom Facebook profile. So as people start learning and experimenting with these languages of authorship, they don't necessarily follow the rules of good taste, and this scares the shit out of designers. It does. We all turn our nose up a little bit, and I was just as guilty. I never really at first, I think until MySpace almost went downhill really kind of dawned on me that it was crazy that people were messing with code, like people that don't do it every day. And that they were spending so much time curating their profile because they wanted it to be Travis online. Like, it was very important to them. People don't spend time on things like that that are not important. So reading this and thinking through some of my own sins of judging people in that way, I felt like it kind of stings and it points out our pretension in a way. And I think we've kind of lost some of our edge overall in the digital space. In our appreciation for experimentation is sort of the wild west of the internet, or the digital space period. And I started wondering, why are we so precious and sometimes overly professional about the things we make, right? It's all client work. Or not all, I shouldn't say, but a great deal of client work. And we kind of have forgotten that we can do other things besides make websites for companies, or make apps for companies, or design logos. So what I'm hoping everyone can do is start to become an artist again. I love how Seth Godin kind of talks about artists and art itself. He says that no matter what you do, whether you are a designer, you work in customer service answering phones, you pump gas, you shuffle paperwork, he says no matter what you do, as long as you're innovating and you're creating and you're thinking about things in a different way and you're really dedicated, that makes you an artist. So some people don't like this idea because it kind of bastardizes the stereotype of someone that like purely makes art and I understand these things and I make art. And I went to school for this and I studied very hard. But it's a really interesting idea to think that no matter what you do, what makes you special is if you care and you try and you really go for it. And I really like how he talks about that. And I think even outside of our discipline, it's a really interesting concept. And I think some of these things I'm talking about kind of bridge that same thing. So can we redefine and accept that things outside of a beautiful website are worth our time and worth creating? I think part of this is that we need to understand that each piece you make and touch with your hands is not the sum total of all of your work and experience. It's okay. You can make things and it does not need to be a masterpiece. Your next piece of work will never be that. Everyone kind of knows that in a way. I think we have a hard time accepting it, but you know when you're on and you have a few projects and then you hit this one and you're like, I killed this. I totally killed this and I found a great solution. And I think what we need to do is loosen the fuck up a little bit and get back to that and understand that that's okay because we're being a little overcritical and not producing enough under these guises. Everything does not need to be responsive and the sum total of your work. It doesn't need to get you more followers or your next big project. You just need to make. You just need to keep going. It's okay that that's the case. You don't have to have a startup to start something besides work. You know what they say about all work and no play. I think it's really important to remember that and get back. You just need to make. So ultimately, we have the skills and the methods of communication at our fingertips to do this, being so connected to the internet and how technically inclined we are. So it's a good time and opportunity, I think, to seize this and go back at it within our community. We have the power to do that. And next, I want to kind of talk about some of the things I see within our community and even on the fringes that I think are kind of working and good points for starting or at least further exploration. I think Twitter, in a lot of ways, of microblogging and status updates, but in a lot of ways, people are using it looking at it in a different way and using it really, really interesting. I think this is a key skill, and something as simple as this, when you really look at it, you need to learn to kind of look at things at a different angle or turn them the other way and think about it in a different way besides it's 140 characters about what I had for lunch. There are people telling stories 140 characters at a time, impersonating religious figures, acting like they're characters. There's goddamn Batman who posts as Batman. There's Smash Hulk something that writes in all caps. And these things never break character. This Twitter account is this person for all, and I think this is part of the thing that's created the need to have verified accounts, funny enough. But you know, a lot of other people too have started to see this as you know, the communication medium it is and really embrace it. And one interesting one that I thought was just a neat concept was comedians. They now have this sort of infinite space in a venue. Like a venue, you know, a few hundred, an arena has a few thousand, right? But on Twitter, you can have millions of followers. So now they have this endless routine, which just continues every day, every time they post, to as many people as they want. And I was like, I guess it is. It's an endless routine. Like, they're never off. They're never off stage. They just keep talking and keep giving punchlines. And it's really funny, and those are some of actually my favorite ones on there. Another person I think has done a lot of really, really interesting work in the digital space is Joshua Davis. He's a designer and illustrator and artist. And he kind of has like an interesting twist, I think, in his work that he uses for most projects. He illustrates by hand or even, you know, vector in the computer. Ultimately, they end up being vectorized elements, and then programmatically generates them into different compositions and layouts. So he's got this really odd intersection, and he has a varying degree of sort of curation at the end after it's pumped out through the application he writes. And it really depends on the project. So some have a heavier hand in the end. So maybe he programs it a little bit less and he customizes it a little bit more when it comes out. For a while too, he even had a lab that you could go to on his site where he released code that I thought was really fun. You could tell that this was his little experimentation and playground. He released code that kind of like made things bounce or interact a certain way when you moved around. And it was just his little test files for things that would go into other pieces of work and stuff he would use. So you could download the code and you could play with the Swifts online. And then if you keep up with his work, you know, you'd start to see those things pop up throughout his projects. And you could kind of be like, I remember when he was playing with that. I remember the day he posted it. Because it was pretty much just like a blog. He would just post new code as he did it. This is an example of his artwork, and just to speak a little bit more about the generative process, so he has all these shapes, and some of these shapes, I believe, were actually drawn in, like he would make this little target, and then say, okay, this is an element, and then some of them, they were actually programmed, like make a circle and make it varying degrees of this color. And then obviously some of these more organic shapes, these are some of the things he drew and traced and then would put in. So he literally wrote an application and said, here are the parameters, and he would sort of code his taste and what he wanted into the application, which is a pretty wild idea. There's some text too, it's a little grayed out, but he would say, okay, generate a line from, you know, this array or this text, and then put it in this typeface and make it 30% of the composition or something. So there was one that really blew my mind that I read about in an interview. And he said there was a BMW project where they wanted these one-off prints. Because he makes quite a lot of prints, but they wanted one-offs of like a bajillion different compositions. So there was no feasible way that he could actually hand alter and curate this many pieces. He couldn't give his artist touch to each one at the end before it went out. So he said he got kind of bummed out, I guess, and saw it as a little bit of defeat, but then he got around it and he just said, well, shit, I'll just program my taste in it harder. So he had tighter rules and more things he programmed in to tell the composition to be what Joshua Davis likes, which is an awesome idea. And it kind of brings up like an awesome intersection between art and technology and what you can do. And I think this is something we should sort of look at and head towards and use some of these technical skills. He had PlayStation and Once Upon a Forest, and what I liked, this is actually a Once Upon a Forest piece. These kind of would animate and move. They kind of felt like the drawing was like alive, which is one of my favorite things, when they kind of come in and bounce. And some of these elements were separate. It wasn't like one canvas that came in. But you could tell that these were his playground. Just like I said, he released that code in the labs. You could see these things he was trying out. And then in his commercial work, you could tell how it was informing that and see what he had kind of learned. And I think even in his pieces throughout time, like this one, even is a little more chaotic than some of the ones. I have a print on my wall that's actually very similar to this, different color scheme. But I think it's a more serene version of this, and I think he kind of got down some of these things he was playing with over time. Another person I think does really, really fun work is Michael Cena, who does True is True. And he just generates a simple kind of click-through one-at-a-time gallery / blog, where he just posts images of what he's working on. And this is one of them. I love flat vector, so I picked one of my favorites. But what's funny is it's literally just like a PNG or a JPEG sitting in a browser, right? And it shrinks down. But it's so untechnical that you'll see white bars sometimes, and you'll see where the image ends if you're on a big screen. So he doesn't really care, but that's one of the things I think is kind of cool about it is he's just like, I'm just gonna throw this up. And he just generates, he makes so many of them. And you can tell that he's playing with different compositions and different mediums, and you can see even, one of the patterns I really like is you can kind of tell he's working through an idea or a certain type of work within a medium, because he'll go for a week at a time and have all these paintings, right? He'll do this, and then the next day, all of a sudden have this painting that's like goopy and thick, and it looks like you can reach into it, like the strokes are really big. And he'll do that a little while, and then you'll see one interspersed where he scanned or shot the painting, flattened it where it's just this rough texture, and then lays type over it, and then back to the painting, and then he does one of these. So it's really fun. You can tell it's like whatever he's interested in or feels like he needs to work through, he just starts doing it, throws some shit up, and then moves on. And I think it's kind of like, it's important to give your visual library these kind of skills, and playing around like this does that. Instagram has kind of risen as a semi-recent visual form of self-documentation expression that has more immediacy than what Flickr did when everyone was using that. And sure, it has bad things like MySpace too. There's the dudes with their shirt off taking pictures in the mirror. And there's everyone's cats, which I'm guilty of that too. And what they had for lunch. But it builds a lot of important skills that as any visual person are important, like composition and understanding that and balance. And kind of just having an eye for things as you walk around. If you don't do a lot of photography, I mean, I haven't been doing a lot before. And it kind of makes me look at things a little bit more. Has anyone seen these? This is one of my favorite things on Instagram. So this was a BMX biker who announced he was leaving this sponsor. So you know how a lot of like skateboarders and bikers, it's almost like their team. They're sponsored by this main brand, and that's their thing. It's the equivalent of being on Manchester United or in football. And they're very loyal to this. They always wear all this stuff. This was the first place that he announced he was leaving the team, which was kind of crazy. Everyone was shocked, and I read about this and linked through on all these blogs and all these articles about these people freaking out. Like, this is fairly big news. So I've also noticed this if you ever go to the popular tab and you start drilling down into somebody's profile and you look down at all their photos, you'll see that people have started bending this into this communication medium where it was just pictures before, but now they're holding court for all their followers and sending these messages. And I also love that it is really simple, and it's in an app that's like already bundled with the phone everyone has, right? I would have never thought of this, but somebody who couldn't make graphics and wanted to say something to someone, somebody started this somewhere and was just like, well, I got this thing, and I can take a screen cap and then upload it. We also have a reemergence of sort of these designed blogs. This is an entry from Greg's journal. This is Dan Mall's site. He also had this really awesome interaction where you could use the arrow keys and didn't even have to click. But the website and article sort of becomes this thing. This is an example from Eurons where he sort of illustrated something that had to do with the story he was telling. So that was what's working now. And then I think what we need to also look at is that we have strength in numbers. If we come together, collaborators can be sort of a vital part of your creative health and then bring you into new territories. These people sort of become like a support system when you work, when you need to talk about work. And I think these examples that I'm going to follow up with illustrate each sort of a different method of working together and a reason that working with other people is important. Bands in general are a really great example of this. There's something, although a lot of people play music on their own too, and they're solo artists. when these people come together, there's something magical that happens when they create something live all at once. And I think if you ever played music or you go to a show, for a band you particularly like, this is one of those things, once again, like, even if you don't understand the music, there's something you feel like you like the music, and these people are all doing this magical thing at the same time. And it's one of my favorite things about music. I think it's incredible when people come together and create this thing, in this instance right now. You know, each on their own plays a different instrument or sings and can do this on their own, but then when the sum of all the parts kind of come together, I think there's something even more special there. One example of this is the song Idiotech from Radiohead. Although it wasn't live, but it was people pairing up that are in a band. He was in a Fresh Air interview and he was talking about this song. And he said that Johnny, the guitar player who did soundtracks like There Will Be Blood, and he came in one day and he was like, Tom, I've got this DAT of 50 minutes of me just jamming out. And he just kind of handed it to him and was like, listen to this and see if there's anything in here you like, see if we can use any of this. So he listened, and then his quote is, but then there was this section in about 40 minutes that was absolute genius. I just cut that out and that was it. So he grabbed 40 seconds of this 50-minute DAT and was like, we're gonna write a song around this. So then they all got back together, and that's what the song Idiotech is. It started from 40 seconds of a jam session that one guy did. And I love this kind of naturalistic approach and, you know, in a way unegotistical. Like, Tom York is an amazing musician and he writes a lot of songs for them, but it's really incredible that someone as good as him even knows when to simply edit or riff off someone else and kind of set that aside and say, okay, this is a great starting point. Like, you're really onto something and I see where we can go with this. So editing and starting from someone else's point, I think, are key skills in this teamwork. The Expatriates in Paris, the group of writers around the 20s, was another one. They kind of had the right combination of environment, people, and freedoms, you know, political, sexual, artistic within France, and sort of came together and had what ended up, I think, with the important thing to take from them is they kind of had vibe and environment and the right place, right time in their community of sharing. Rather than actually working on exact pieces together, although they did some of that, they edited magazines together and did create, you know, it was more about sitting in the bars and cafes and the kind of constant feedback and discussion that I think drove a lot of their work and made that a successful environment and kind of drove all them together to be really great writers. They were essentially just talking a lot of shop. Another great one that is an example of people actually working together on the same thing in a larger group is the Black Mountain College, which was formed in North Carolina in the States in 1933. And it was an experimental liberal arts college that did just about everything. They composed music, they designed, they wrote poetry, they choreographed dances, and they actually worked on all these things together. This is a picture from one of their pieces, and this is only a subset. I will read all the crazy people that are in it. Doing a piece all at once called Variations 5. And John Cage had started it, and he did field recordings. There were electronic percussionists, choreographers, various electronic devices, photoelectric devices, televised image distortions, mixing, tape recordings, lighting, shortwave receivers, and it was all arranged by a couple different people. So everyone kind of came together and would make this thing, and I think this picture is super awesome. So we have loads of examples of artists and people forming collectives from the past, and we also have more modern ones, even outside of sort of the digital design realm. There's the Art Dump, if anyone is into skateboarding or kind of follows any of those artists. One of my favorite designers is kind of part of that and came from that family. You know, they band together, they make things together, they kind of live in the same area of California, and they work together to help each other and kind of push each other, although they do different things. There's illustrators, there's designers, photographers, there's designers/photographers. But where are all the digital design collectives? Where are the people banding together to create these kind of things outside of client work? Personally, I have several people that are my creative support system, and one of them is my friend Matt. He is an artist. He makes a lot of drawings and does also installation pieces based off found objects and sort of puts them together in interesting ways. And one of the reasons he is one of the most important people in my kind of creative life is he has this insane ability to create connections between completely disparate objects and things and concepts. So he, like Dan said, he had mentioned connecting the dots and how important that is. Matt will take things that most designers wouldn't even consider and can draw a line from 1 to 2 and tell you exactly why this obscure idea or concept or piece has to do with it. And it's something that really drives me hanging out with him is I hope to have 1/10 someday of the connections that he's possible to make. And why I think he's good at that is he has this kind of infinite visual reference guide and just looks at things in a different way. He has a weird angle on things. And it really makes him an amazing artist because he always just sees something no one else is seeing, but it's all purposeful. So when you work your way back into this habit of creating, I like to think about it as training. I really like this term, and I think training forces you to do different things, push yourself harder, and kind of go past where you have been to do new things. Because craft is when you truly understand how to translate what you do. Buckminster Fuller was one of the original people at the Black Mountain College that I was talking about, and I really like this quote of his. This is the main line that I think is really, really important, though, in these terms of training. He says, "I live on Earth at present. I don't know what I am. I know that I'm not a category. I'm not a thing, a noun. I seem to be a verb, an evolutionary process, an integral function of the universe." So I think these connections with others and our non-work activities and training are very important to this kind of evolution. And what if we realize that they're a must within our professional journey? What if we see these things as critical and not side projects and not frivolous? I think that all of these things kind of enrich your work and they're not wasting time, whereas some people think about billable hours and I should be doing client work. These are all things that are going to make all those things better in the end. They're going to make your work way better because they're enriching everything else you do. You're adding things to your visual library and kind of into your ammo. I don't think things have to actually mean something to be work and worthy of your time. Some things can be frivolous and just for fun and just for the sake of exploring. That doesn't mean that you should totally run amok 100% of the time. I think if you kind of use these principles of interface design as a starting point, you can think about them and sort of work them into your training and methods of exploration to kind of better understand these things, which are going to be even more poignant to your work. So think about tolerance, simplicity, visibility, affordance, consistency, structure, and feedback when you make these things. Kind of approach them and try to tackle these issues within your projects. And like I said, I think it's okay. You're never going to be done. You're never going to completely master. You need to keep doing this. And I think this quote is great. He says, "We're all apprentices in a craft where no one ever becomes a master." It's a Hemingway quote. So he's talking about writing, but it's really applicable to what we do. There's always going to be more. And hopefully you can keep that feeling where even when you do hit that next area you want to be in your work or career, you see the next one after that. You should keep going and be seeing the next one after. So it all has value, and I think we need to find appreciation in the frivolity and just creating for the sake of creating. Realize it's not aimless, and it's okay. You can still treat it like a project and have constraints and guidelines. It's just a different end goal rather than the client's goal. It's your goal. So I want to, let's make things again that kind of mean something, and even if it's just for ourselves, it's great to share them. So I think we should create, document, and share these experiences while we make these pieces, and talk with other people about your journey and the path that you took to get there as sort of a map for other people to follow. Let's go back to our roots and kind of think about the original reasons that we got into design in the first place and had this creation bug. And remember drawing when you were younger. Remember things like Mine is My Kind of Hero. What were those things that piqued your interest at first? What album cover did you see that made you feel this way? And sort of bring back these feelings that we lost a long time ago. Thank you.